Ahoy! New World Update 1.94 is out, and it comes with the new Fury of the Spriggan event, but also some very important balance changes. The Fury of the Spriggan event is the new world event. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to show you some of the gameplay in the background. As expected with these types of events, at the moment it's extremely laggy because it's a very crowded area with everyone going there at the same time. We see some minor fixes that were introduced with this patch here, some lore notes and a lighting issue. But exponentially more important is the next change. Fixed an issue that caused the Invigorated Punishment perk to apply on basic attacks instead of just abilities. This is an extremely interesting change. For many players, at the moment, the best in slot option is to have Hardy and a damage perk as well as Invigorated Punishment because it applies to everything. This is known by a lot of players, though not everyone, but it was always also somewhat weird because the description specifically only mentions abilities. I was always wondering if this was intended or not, if they just forgot to add this into the description or if they just forgot to scale this properly, and now we have an answer. I think it's a bit of a surprising time to change this because it will affect a lot of players' builds, especially in PvP. But at the same time, it is clearly doing something the description doesn't intend it to do, at least from the wording that we have currently. So yeah, it wasn't entirely shocking that this happened eventually, I would say. It's just more a bit of a surprising timing to me. I would have expected them to fix this with the next major patch instead, or with the next season where everyone is getting new gear anyways. Now, this does not make Invigorated Punishment bad. If you are using a lot of abilities, then obviously this is still very, very effective. On an ability like an Ice Gauntlet, for example, I would say you still get a lot of benefit out of it. On a Fire Staff, probably too, though you're still doing a lot of basic attack damage. But yeah, depending on how much basic attack damage you do, this may be more or less impactful. I think this will be particularly felt by melees, especially melee schizo builds, where you want to have maximum basic attack damage and you're using basic attacks quite frequently. Similarly, I also expect this to nerf bows a fair bit. This nerf mainly affects best in slot gear that has double damage perks, but it also affects Champion's Ring, which is a very accessible ring that a lot of players are using. For certain roles, this should mean that they would instead opt for something like Hardy plus some form of damage perk plus some form of either Keen or Leeching perk, depending on what playstyle you're going for. But there's obviously a lot of options here. And what I also think is interesting is that while Invigorated Punishment doesn't affect basic attacks anymore, it is worth keeping in mind that it'll always affect both of your weapons. So for example, say you're running a Great Axe and a Hammer, then at the moment if you're running slash damage, it's only affecting your Great Axe, and if you're running strike damage, it's only affecting your Hammer, while your Invigorated Punishment will affect both. That does somewhat offset for some of the damage that you're not getting from using basic attacks now. And compared to using, for example, slash damage, this does somewhat offset for that damage loss from basic attacks now, because you're getting less from the basics on one weapon, but more from the abilities on both. But since Invigorated Punishment also only applies to a specific group of self-buffs or buffs from allies, it is somewhat more limited now, and I do think that in certain builds, it's probably not optimal to use it. I was just talking about it yesterday, and now we have a buff for it, which came out basically as I was finishing up the video. Dark Ascent is getting 15 frames of invulnerability on startup when going into the air. I think this is absolutely fantastic. So previously, Dark Ascent didn't really do that much against other Heartrunes. So for example, if somebody charges at you with a Detonate Heartrune, I always felt like if you fly above that, you should be able to avoid the damage from that detonation. And the flight height is actually not high enough to get outside of the sphere that Detonate has. It goes up as well, so it'll still hit you. And I always thought that was pretty frustrating because that would be such a cool counterplay. Now, with these 15 frames of invulnerability, you can do exactly that. Somebody else is charging at you with something that deals a lot of damage, you fly up and you iframe that. And then they are in a bad position because they have charged you, and now you drop down on them, deal damage to them, potentially stagger them depending on what Heartrune you're using, and you heal back up. For some players, in some situations, I think this will be more effective than a Heartrune of Stone form. I have to look into it deeper and test it a little bit more, but I do think this is absolutely very appealing for Dark Ascent, and I'm very happy about this change. I hope this is what they're doing with Heartrunes looking forward, just going through a lot of the current balance and the current versions of them and see how they can make them more effective and balanced against each other. And on the topic of balancing things against each other, they are also nerfing Detonate. They're increasing the self-rend on the Brutal variant from 15 to 30%. So the risk-reward ratio on Detonate, on Brutal Heartrune of Detonate in particular, is becoming lower and lower. You're just way more likely to die while using this, both in PvP and even in PvE. This is still okay in some situations, but again, tied to a lot more danger, and now you may also be targeting someone who will just fly into the air when you do it and have iframes, and then you wasted it all and you still took more damage for the whole time. My main annoyance with it is that there still isn't a version that just has normal damage. The purple version just does slightly less damage than the legendary versions, and the legendary versions either have the damage increase on the brutal version along with the self-rend, or they have decreased damage in both cases, and I don't think that's how it should be. I wish they changed one version to just be the basic damage and then a minor additional effect so that all versions could be considered for different situations. I definitely think this is going to lead to interesting shifts in wars when it comes to Heartrune usage. Unstable casts are getting upgrades again. This time you can no longer craft weapons with dual attributes, it's just single attributes now, but they can now also roll the Sentry attribute perk. The armor can also no longer have the Indestructible perk, so they really want us to use Unstable Cast. Memento Amissum, a housing item from a new quest, will no longer drop upon death. And the Empyrean Forge now has a 50% chance to drop flame cores from elite chests. I hope this is true for the mutation chests as well and not just for the base version. But either way, I think this is a very good addition. I was very annoyed that using the Forge to farm flame cores was just not an option at all compared to everything else. But at the same time, flame cores are so available now everywhere that it doesn't really matter anymore. Especially with the new event also providing flame cores, it's just giving everyone a ridiculous amount. So by now, I don't think anyone really cares. And ironically, while they meant to nerf the drop chance of the flame cores in open world elite chests, they somehow created an issue that made them drop twice instead. So that one's fixed now, so maybe that'll affect the price a little bit, but I doubt it, but because of the event and because the other flame cores are coming out. So there's flame cores everywhere anyways. They also fixed a supposedly rare issue that small loot containers give no loot. I think this was not actually that rare, but it's finally fixed. And there was an issue with leaderboard rewards for companies specifically. There are a variety of UI fixes, you can see them here, not really that important for most of us. They changed quite a few things about the Season Pass. One thing is that if you completed a challenge because the maximum required was reduced, that would not count towards other challenges like complete a seasonal challenge, so that should now be counted towards it as well. But more importantly for most players, they changed the amount of Season XP earned. For stamping a Season Activity card, you now get 300 XP instead of 250. For completing a line on the Season Activity card, you now get 500 XP instead of 400. Completing a whole Season Activity card now gives you 400 XP instead of 300. To me, this makes it much more appealing to just finish one row and just move on, because that's how you get a lot of XP very, very quickly, and I think that is what they want to incentivize further here, and once again show us that we shouldn't try to fill the whole card every time, because the extra XP is not really that much in comparison, unless obviously you just want to do that. Very sad news, players can no longer access the tops of tents in the attacker's war camp. That was always nice to have a look over there, and that's no longer possible, but you can also no longer enter the enemy spawn in Outpost Rush, which is most certainly a good change. If you enjoyed this video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. As for the new event, as you can see from the loots I'm getting here, you have a pretty decent chance to get some good loot, especially for Angry Earth if you're after that. This is a bit surprising in the context of the next arena, or the big Elite Arena, Elite Trial, not being Angry Earth. We now know that it's Beast. I really thought that the gear would be for that, so I'm not quite sure what people would need it for, because sure, you can use it to play Genesis and stuff, but I feel like a lot of people already have gear for that, and outside of that, maybe their main focus here is Transmog, because these have some fairly unique looking designs that otherwise take quite a while to grind, so this is a more cheap and easy way, I suppose, to get these designs if you're interested in them. It's also a pretty decent way to farm random named items if that's something you're interested in. For most people it's probably not that appealing, but if you're a collector then you can get them quite often here from this 30% chance. I personally think it's worth doing this event 3 times per day while you get 2 caches with the named items and everything as well as the other stuff from the Spriggan arena, and then afterwards I'm just not gonna bother, and I hope that doing this the whole time throughout the event I'll be able to get the housing item as well. It is definitely nothing super special or exciting. It's like every other world event. It's just kill a few mobs and then kill a big mob, and that's pretty much it. But at this point, I'm just looking at it as a filler until we get to the next patch where the real stuff happens. And in between, hopefully very soon, we'll have the PTR, so that's what I'm really excited for. If you want to play with me on the PTR, again, consider following me on Twitch, twitch.tv/SLOTH. I will stream there when I'm playing. I will try to get people in to try the new raid boss, or maybe the 10-man trial as well, to see how that goes, because I really want to get a good feel for that. Other than that, we were talking about the perk rework soon. We were talking about various things related to armor, shocking fortification, elemental aversion, you know the drill. It's all still coming. There's just so many news at the moment that I'm kind of putting that first. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all my patrons for supporting this video. SLOTH, out.